Hi everyone, welcome to Charting Change in Legal. I'm Caroline Hill, I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Legal IT Insider, and I'm here with
Ari Kaplan. I am an analyst that covers the legal industry. And Caroline, I know that you just returned from the Extraordinary Legal Geek conference. How was it?
It was great. It was absolutely great. It was packed. There were about 1,700 people there. It was rammed. Everybody by day two, it's not as long as ILTA. By day two full days, everybody was exhausted from all the networking, which is a kind of nice problem to have. And I think everybody turned out in force, partly because it was a great conference, but partly because as a sort of nod of respect for Jimmy Vesper, the founder, because there was a tube and rail strike, which was a potential disaster for the Forth, meaning that people couldn't get there. So Jimmy literally chartered boats, buses, you name it. He found alternative. He said that there was a lot of banter on LinkedIn because he said that if anybody turned up by horse on horseback, they would get free tickets to Legal Geek for life. So I spoke to somebody who was contemplating joining the local pony club, which was, so there's a lots of hilarity around it, that kind of solidarity that you get when there's a bit of a disaster.
Yeah.
I drove in to London, which was 2.5 hours, which was a nightmare. Driving in London is not fun, but I got there both days, and I have to say, it was great. Like lots of people there. You tend to get the innovation heads, lawyers. Don't tend to get a lot of CIOs or IT heads. It's interesting. So you sort of get certain communities, and there was great networking, really great networking. I think the reason people go there, I mean, I'll come back to this in a second actually, but because I did a few sort of quick fire interviews with people, some really senior people, and was talking about what their priorities were and how their priorities had changed from a few years ago. And what's really interesting is that they go there more for the community than perhaps the technology. I don't know if that's a surprise.
No, it's not a surprise. And frankly, that's why I go to a lot of these events. And I think that it's very common. I mean, I just got back from Relativity Fest where there were also 1,700 something people, close to 1,800. And it was a wonderful community type event. It was great sessions and there were a number of great discussions, but certainly the running with people or having coffee is really the biggest part of those kinds of discussions. It's wonderful.
Yeah, they said so in these quick fire interviews. They said so it was quite interesting actually. I said, are you here, what new tech, are you here to look at new technology? And it was quite interesting because a couple of people said that they're really this year they're not, and without being disrespectful to people that were the vendors at the conference, they said that tech almost has plateaued, like that we have sort of got to this stage where they used to come and they used to look at all these startups, and I'm sure there still are people coming and looking at the startups, but that the fever pitch around startups and trying new tech has kind of plateaued. People were saying that they hadn't seen anything particularly new, and I wonder, I don't want to bring on to Gen AI already, but I do wonder how much, and I ask people how much of that is because of the big changes going on in the background, right? And they're sort of putting things into context a little bit, and how is that changing what people's priorities are when they go to these sorts of conferences?
I don't know if you can relate to this, but I feel like we are in a moment now that's kind of like the night before you leave for a trip. I feel like the night before I leave for a trip, my desk is filled with stuff and I have lists of things to do. And I end up staying up really, really late so that I can clean it all off in an effort to start something fresh. And I feel like in all the conversations I've had, and I have been lucky now to have had over 300 interviews just in this year alone between the corporate leaders, the research I've done, my podcast, and my sense is that a lot of people are kind of clearing their desk, their proverbial desk, their mind, their systems in an effort to make way for what's to come. But I don't know that they can fully focus on that next step because they're still trying to figure out how do I maybe accelerate the processes I have, take maximum advantage of the technology I've already purchased. And so there's a real conflict there, just in terms of people showing you, I want to show you this new amazing thing that I've developed, and it's probably incredible. But right now, I just need to kind of get certain things done before I can focus on that. And it sounds like there's a lot of conversation, there's a lot of fun, it's super interesting, it's very dynamic, a lot of energy, but I'm not sure that that energy is commensurate with the amount of action that people are capable of taking at the moment.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree with you. I compared it to like being like having a baby. Yours is the night before travel, but I was like, it's like when you have a baby and you've got all this other stuff that you've got to do, right? And you're like, oh my goodness, well I've still got this to do and I've still got that to do, and then this thing comes along, and you're just like all of your energy and your focus goes on that as well, you know. And you're like, oh my goodness, but I haven't done this and I haven't got this ready and I'm not ready. I'm just not ready. And I think that's what it feels like. And yeah, no, I agree with you. I think there's a lot of that. It was interesting though. So there was some I spoke to at the conference. I did an interview. Actually, I did it the day before with Noah Weisberg from Zuva.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yep.
he's great. Lots of people know him. He's come out with a new classification product with Latera and Sally, who I know you know quite well as well. So helping
Hmm.
people to work on, because obviously one of the things that people aren't ready, because one of the reasons they're not ready is because their data, we've talked about this before, but their data's still not ready. There's all kinds of stuff. And so this, you know, there's some interesting developments around how to help people get ready, how to help them classify their data. Noah's new offering is around the document management space, where obviously that's one of those areas where there's so much information in there. A lot of it hasn't got any metadata attached to it. So it's really difficult to find stuff. And so when you come to Gen AI, it's search, you know, it's only as good as your data still, right? So that was interesting. Saw Noah at the conference, and then also what was interesting was I did an interview at the conference. It was quite funny trying to do an interview there because you get interrupted every 5 minutes. So I was interviewing Shilpa Bandakar, who is one of the IT and innovation heads at Linklaters. And they have just issued a press release about what they're doing with Gen AI, so they've been very quiet about it, unlike some firms. And they've created their own OpenAI chatbot, which has got very good uptake, and they're working out all the different use cases from that, which has been interesting. They're very much focusing on the learning. So what, you know, created it in a safe space using OpenAI Azure services. And then they are also working with a consultancy on Google Cloud's Vertex AI, which they're using to explore how to do search. So obviously there's lots of different ways, different tools that people are using for search, but finding what you need at point of need is still really difficult. So when you're doing a deal and you need that particular deal, that from that transaction, that particular jurisdiction, it's really hard still to find it. So they're working with Google, who obviously everyone we associate Google with search, to see if they can, you know, what they can do around that, and that's going well as well. And they're working with Co-Counsel as well, which was a bit of a revelation. So yeah, that was quite interesting. Had some really really interesting interviews and chats.
Yeah, I also experienced a lot of discussions. I wonder if we are at this, try very hard not to be a, I try not very hard not to be promotional of anything and not to get too excited about any particular process or technology, and try to be thoughtful about it based on all the conversations I'm lucky to have. And so I find it fascinating, but still in a phase of uncertainty. And lots of organizations deciding, well, really just like studying what their peers are doing to try to determine what that process is going to look like. Although I'm certain that there will be more budget next year for this, and you'll see some change. And I think that's what I hope, for the sake of a lot of these startups, that that's the case, because this year because it came out after budgets were set, I don't think that there was enough opportunity to make investments, but it seems like next year. And also, I'm getting, I don't know what you're seeing in your discussions, but I'm getting a sense of optimism from folks. There's clearly change afoot, but I definitely hear more optimism about making investments, expanding teams, the economy, at least here in the US, seeming like, which could frankly change at any moment it seems, but that the economy seems like it's well, we have a lot of uncertainty here, right? We're entering election season. There's a lot of things happening here in the United States, and I do get the sense from folks that there's a little bit more optimism, and with optimisms comes opportunity for investment and change. And frankly, I think that people are not as fearful of change from a business
Yeah.
standpoint. Do you know what I mean? I feel like we've experienced so much dramatic change over the last few years that people are like, assuming we don't have some global catastrophe, I think our team will be able to handle it, right? You can work from anywhere. You could, overnight, you can shift everything, all of your processes. And so there seems to be like this fun test that people are going through with their teams. They've already experienced so much that they're thinking, all right, new system, oh, fine, new piece of technology, fine, we know who's going to test it and who isn't. And I think that there's a lot of that, and we're all kind of in it together in this point, and just in terms of trying to figure this out. Yet another thing where legal is banding together, whether you're in-house or in a corporation, in a law firm or anywhere else. And I find it a fun moment at in the fourth quarter here.
It's a really interesting perspective, actually. So I suppose if we'd had all of these fast-paced developments pre-COVID, we would probably be feeling in a very different. We would be in a very different place, right? Like, so whereas like it's a really interesting observation that we were hit with the pandemic, and that accelerated a lot of things that should have happened before, for example, moving to the cloud. Although what's interesting is that I think still there's a lot of firms that, albeit they managed during COVID, I think that there's still a lot of firms putting in place better arrangements, better systems, properly moving to the cloud or trying to. I think there's a lot of that core infrastructure work still being done. I know IT teams are so busy. And looking at some of the stats, it's interesting. ILTA's survey came out in the last week or two. And it was really interesting to see, the number of people that are already in the cloud when it comes to things like the DMS. And obviously it's not everybody, right? Like so they've had to come up with arrangements in terms of remote working, but a lot of people are still very much in the cloud journey. It's from Ilta's survey, it seems like there's only one direction that's going in, and that's absolutely right. But there's still a lot of really big infrastructure projects. So although I guess you've got that mentality of changes, okay, you've still got a lot of stuff that needs to be done, right? To almost like bring practices up to modern times.
Well, and I think that the one thing that is different now, in the pandemic, there was an urgency. It was an absolute. You either pivoted or you didn't function. There was no business. You couldn't do any work. Now there is all of what people are perceiving as opportunity, advantage, and an acceleration with respect to generative AI. But the expectations aren't that great. What's happening is, at least based on my conversations, and I'm actually moderating a discussion in a couple of weeks, just between in-house leaders and law firm leaders, to try to understand, what do you expect? What are you doing? How are you navigating that kind of timeline? And it just seems like everybody's working through this now. So they want to work through it in a measured way. There isn't necessarily this external force that's pushing people to make that change and a decision within days or a week. And as a result, people are thinking about, well, what does this tool do? And does it integrate well with what I've already invested in? And is this startup going to last, and do they have the necessary runway to develop what I need them to develop, and what is that service going to look like? And we are really back in a point of moving to another phase of legal tech or legal services, but in a way that allows people to be thoughtful about it. And I think that the clients, meaning the corporate legal departments that are hiring law firms, have an expectation that their firms are probably doing more than they are and that they can trust them, but they're not necessarily expecting them to have it all figured out today. And that sort of gives them some time. And I'm actually excited. I'm going to the knowledge management and innovation for legal conference that's being run by Joshua Fireman and Patrick DiDomenico in a couple weeks. And I'm really looking forward to that because those are the folks that are on the ground, selecting technology, implementing it, making choices like this. And not only that, this is not new for these folks. This is a
Yeah.
community of people that have been doing it since the beginning. And they're just really applying the strategies that they applied with cloud or whatever document management tools or predictive coding or any other application that was kind of new. They needed to test, they needed to make persuasive arguments, and they needed to drive change. And this is yet another milestone in that journey.
Do you know what you're talking about? Oh, there's so many thoughts actually, and I must come back before we finish to. I've got to thank you because after you talking about the clock session that you did at ILTA, I managed to interview Joy Heathrush and Mike Haven, referencing. So
Oh,
let
how
me come.
lucky. I actually saw that. I actually saw that. Yeah,
Yeah.
fantastic
But so
discussion. Yep.
before I come back to that, so don't let me forget, remind me. But were you talking about TAR, so within the e-discovery sector, technology assisted review? What's really interesting about, so there was so much case law, like that, those guys, yeah, they were at the forefront of all of that, and that was really new. And using technology to do these reviews, and there's lots of case law about can it be used, and it would be interesting with generative AI. Like, there's not, it seems to be just accepted, right? Like that people are going to be using it. And whereas with technology assisted review, there was so much thought about, is it okay to be using it, right? And all this case law. There's obviously forget actually that you'll remember the definitive case law that sort of said, yeah, no, you can use it. And then you've got kind of moved to this point where actually you probably from a cost perspective should be using it, but it was a really long journey, right? And whereas now with Gen AI, it's literally like, this is it, right? Everybody's just using it, and there's so many, there's so many shortcuts, I think, being taken, and it's just so different to those early days when these guys were sort of at the forefront of that.
What I find relatable is that back in the, let's call it the early days of what, as you're describing, I think that the legal questions and considerations were different. It seems to me that legal used to be about eliminating risk. In the earliest stage, like I'm a lawyer, I'm going to eliminate as much risk as possible for my client. My client is going to find that of highest value. And then as legal has become much more of a business and the clients recognize that legal can't be the place where everything stops and yet has to be a place that kind of filters out the stuff that needs to stop and then pushes forward the stuff that drives the business forward. I think that the risk tolerance has changed. So
Yeah,
whereas before there was this sort of very limited threshold for risk, now clients are saying, "Let me decide how much risk. Give me the landscape. Where are the boundaries of risk, and I'll decide how much I'm willing to take." And
yeah,
as a result, you've seen much more rapid adoption of technology in the sector. And
yeah,
the generative AI applications that I'm seeing at the earliest stages are typically not things that are going to determine some threshold issue in court. It's much more of a let's try this in the office, create some sort of chat bot, let's make customer service and legal easier, as
yeah.
opposed to let's try to find the definitive case and
Needle in the
let's
haystack.
use that, right? Like totally reliance on a massive
Yeah,
proposition
yeah,
or a massive due diligence transaction. So I think that's what's happening, but you're absolutely correct. That has set a very solid foundation. And frankly, I've often said that the folks who are experienced in e-discovery and technology and project management and budgeting are the folks who are now leading legal operations initiatives, and they are leading other very high level initiatives as a result of their experience. And it's not surprising to me that ILTA and Clock have decided to enter into this informal collaboration, because you have incredibly dynamic teams of folks that really have shared experiences at their base foundation.
Yeah, well, that's a very good segue, Ari. Very good segue.
That's me. Segue king.
So,
Actually,
so
I'm terrible with segues. On the
that was
virtual
a great
lunch,
segue.
on the virtual lunch, there's always a comedy. It's always sort of like we're talking about something, and I'm like, and anyway, let's move on. And they're just like, wow, that was not smooth at all. It was like smooth as not. I'm not
So
smooth as
it
not.
was
Where
you. So you. We talked about ILTA, and we talked about
yeah,
you were involved in the clock stream, right? And
yes.
so we talked about that in one of the previous podcasts, which was great. Anyway, so I went to Clock in London very recently, and I had a meeting with Mike Haven and Joy Heath Rush was there from ILTA, right? So what's great is that obviously at ILTA for the first time you had this clock stream, and then at Clock, Joy was there. It was, it felt very significant, right? So she made the effort to come over. It was just her, but and so we went and sat, the three of us, and had a cup of tea. We were very British about it, and talked about the ways in which they were talking or interested in collaborating. And it's such a key moment, I think. You talking about what the clients expect of the law firms, and how the law firms should be responding. These are conversations that you can't have in isolation, right? They need to be done together. And what better way to do it than for Clock and ILTA to collaborate to try and facilitate those high level, obviously this is happening on a client law firm basis, but these are big conversations, and it was so great to see the ideas bouncing off Mike and Joy, in terms of, obviously they're going to potentially do more stuff on at a conference level, and also the other thing that they were talking about doing is potentially collaborating on a survey together, and bringing together their own data, and they're not obviously jointly, but they're very much sort of talking about different ways they can collaborate. And Mike has been long said, and both of them actually, that he's really open to collaborating with other organizations for the benefit of the industry, right? So any of those kind of concepts of land grabbing and protectionism, which we have seen, right? We've seen that there's a sort of competitive element to these things. That really feels like it's being pushed to one side, which is really reassuring.
Legal is such a unique profession in the way it slices and dices itself. So, you have legal operations, and you have law firm technology, which is historically what ILTA has focused on for the most part. But you also have the ACC, you have several paralegal associations, you have e-discovery associations. As you know, I'm fortunate to be the chairman of the Global Advisory Board for ACEDS, and that those the constituents of that organization and others like EDRM, like they are part of other different groups, and there's overlap. And so it takes really wonderful leaders like Mike and Joy to say we could exponentially increase the benefit to our members and to our respective communities and the broader community if we could combine rather than separate our different levels of expertise. And so when I was there moderating with Jack Thompson and Farrah Pepper, the corporate legal days discussions, it was just wonderful to be in the room and also to create a forum in which those who are buying and using and considering technology or different processes are actually having conversations with those who are selling and developing. And that was really meaningful, both to those people who are trying to understand how to better serve the buyers, and also for the buyers to say, look, we don't need this or that. We really want this other thing, which frustrates us that you haven't figured out yet. And I, as you know, do a lot of research where I'm asking people specific questions about vendors and what they like and dislike, and very candid kind of commentary. I feel really proud when I share that, because you can't always get that. And it's only through some of that constructive feedback that things change and move forward.
Yeah, it's so true. And Joy made the observation, people buy from people, right? Like, so this is a tech business, but actually it's all about relationships, and the more we can do to build those relationships, and the more we can do to communicate and understand, and then we'll start to be able to make, you know, some difference.
And both of them have been in the trenches on the ground. Mike is
Yeah,
obviously still holds a very high level role at Intel, but he's been a practitioner in house for many years. And so I've learned many things from him over more than a decade, frankly. And Joy was, of course, I think she was at Sidley, but she was at a firm in Chicago for many, many years, leading the charge and also being a leader in her community before becoming the leader of ILTA. So both of them bring together a wealth of experience and a background that puts them in the position of the people that they're helping to serve. And I think it's not surprising that you're seeing them kind of push forward in terms of how their respective organizations are serving those who are members, because they know what it feels like, and they kind of can anticipate what will be expected. I think the
yeah,
question will be for all of these organizations is not just sort of what's next, it's what will continue to make them necessary and relevant. It's not just thinking about as we become more stratified, and as the sort of the community aspect of a lot of this is so critical, and organization, and there's just so much competition for people's attention. There
yeah,
used to be a handful of conferences, and then the vendors, the companies themselves figured out, you know what? I can we have such a strong community. Relativity Fest is a great example, right? Relativity Fest started, I'm pretty sure, in 2010. It's an amazing event. It draws almost 2,000 people to Chicago every year who are huge fans of that the software, the community. CleoCon is happening, right? That
yeah.
is a massive event. It draws all kinds of fans from all over the world. It's just you have so Everlaw's having an event. I don't want to skip people. I know that Xtero had just recently had an event, so I'll of course have to skip. But iManage has, like there are all these different big hand, but I just think it's fascinating that all of these different organizations. So imagine, that if Relativity started in 2010, it was probably one of the first, right? And so
Mm,
before that, you were talking about just industry events, an ILTACon, a legal week. Clock was not around at that time. So all of a sudden you were, just ACC, of course, had events, but now there's so much that, people, so much competition for one's attention.
yeah,
And it just really requires innovative and dynamic leaders to reimagine what are they offering, what are they doing, and they're the best people suited to do that.
yeah. This time of year is crazy, right? This is the time of year when there's so many things going on, you
Every week,
know.
we were just talking about this recently, this
Oh
idea
my
of
God.
just so many things. So you might miss Relativity Fest, but then you'd go to Legal Geek. You might miss Legal Geek, but then you'd go to CleoCon, and then you just it sort of goes on and on and on. And of course, there are only certain times of year where people either have the time and have
Mm,
the sort of interest, and also this is an important time of year, right? At the beginning of the fourth quarter, people are thinking, what's my plan for next year? People are want to get into the budget conversation in advance, and I think that that's a really important thing. Actually, as I'm saying it, I'm like, gosh, I have so many things to do. I really want to get into the budget conversation, and I think that there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that happening. So one thing I will just recommend to people as we sort of start to wind down here,
mm,
I I think that what's most valuable for people who go to a lot of these events is the follow-up, and it shouldn't be
yeah,
lost. And for me personally, I always struggle with this and try to figure out how to adequately follow up. I am still following up from serving as the MC of the Lexpo conference in June. And
yeah, I
so
know.
I just think that that's a really important part of this that people shouldn't let go and shouldn't let go too long. So that's almost in some ways a charge to myself to say, make sure you follow up with all the people you spoke to at Relativity Fest. And so I suggest
Mhm.
that to the folks who went to Legal Geek, and I suggest that to the folks who are going to CleoCon to take advantage of all of that, because a lot of the real work happens in the follow up. The conversation is great. The idea of saying hello and smile and a hug and the quick drive-by conversation, but the most meaningful stuff, the change that really gets driven, happens in the, hey, let's follow up. I'll send you my calendar
Yeah.
link, you send me yours, and we'll see what happens.
I tell you what, I've got I might do so we'll do an exclusive announcement, but we're launching something which I think will help with that, which is really super exciting that we're working on in the background, which I think will
Yeah.
be quite useful for people. I'll do an exclusive announcement shortly when it's ready to go. But actually we've got just in terms of staying on top of doing a bit of a plug actually, so in terms of staying on top of what events there are or sharing your events, if people are listening in and they want to make sure everyone's aware of their event, on legaltechnology.com we have an events page where you can list, it's all free, I'm not trying to make money out of this, you can list your event, and it means that people can know what's coming up, um, or B, so work out what they want to go to, but also, when you're scheduling something and you're trying to find a date that isn't taken, it's quite useful for that. So if you go to that and put your event in, and then everyone can stay on top of it. But it's always great chatting with you. I can't wait till the next time.
I
And
love these conversations, Carol. I love that they're free flowing, they're genuine and authentic. I actually just want to close with that. I think that that is something that I have observed in a lot of different discussions at the events I've been to recently. The CEO of Relativity gave a really authentic keynote, and I feel like I've seen that more and more, where people recognize that we are in many ways a community, and we are in many ways trying to figure out a lot of these issues together,
yeah,
and we recognize nothing is perfect at this moment, but together we'll kind of figure it out. We'll share ideas, and those who are bringing people together, like Jimmy, like Jack Newton, the folks who are really really trying to create a forum for this conversation, are doing great work. And I just I'm glad to be part of it, and so wonderful to see you.
so wonderful to see you too. Next time.